Good Monday, everyone. I would say good afternoon, but I don't know where you're located. It's evening where my guest is, or nearly evening, and I will introduce her and bring her in a second. But I want to welcome you for joining us today on another Live with Kevin, which will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. But before we get to the podcast part of the program, just a welcome to you and a couple of thoughts. Number one, if you're joining us live, here's what I hope that you will do. I hope that you will hit the comment section or the chat function, whatever social platform you're watching this live stream on, and say hello. Tell us where you're located. We'd love to know that. And while you're doing that, that'll get you used to knowing that it's okay for you to comment. Because if you were joining my guest and I around a table for a conversation, it would be a conversation, right? You wouldn't just listen to us. You'd ask a question, share a comment, offer an idea. You would do those things naturally. So I hope that you will do those even though we're virtual, because when you do that, it engages you more. It helps you get more from this, and it will likely make this a better conversation now and a better podcast for other people later. So welcome and enjoy and engage. There's my advice to you. And with that, we'll get ready to start what will eventually be this episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. The title of this episode is Leading Through Technology and People. But if you're in a non-tech company, even if that exists, you're still in the right place. We're talking with a respected and experienced leader who has led technological innovations in technology-driven companies and been successful through the intelligence of her team and the quality of her leadership. This will be a practical and helpful conversation about where we're leading today and where we're moving in the future. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future for live episodes, likely on your favorite social media platform. You can find out when those are happening, so then you can join us by either joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, just two of the platforms where these take place. So you can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all the inside scoop, get the dates, and join us live. If you like what you're hearing today and want help developing the leaders in your organization, let's talk. Reach out to info@kevinikenberry.com. We'll schedule time to learn about your needs and see how we might be able to help. Now, with that, let me bring in our guest. Here she is, all the way from Denmark today, recently in Mexico, but today at home or in her space in Denmark. Her name is Louisa Lorman. She has led transformational growth across some of the world's most respected companies for over 2 decades, and on all continents. She has worked across B2B, B&C, and within global tech, bridging commercial impact with human-centered change. She serves on the boards of the Copenhagen Business School and Catacap Private Equity, and is the author of the new book. You're used to hearing me say that. The author of this book, Leadership Anatomy in Motion, subtitled Empowering You to Lead Through Technology and People. And so, Louisa, thank you. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Welcome back from vacation, too.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Great to be here.
So I get a lot of books, and I read a lot of books, but I get a lot of books, and it's not very often that I get a book that has the word anatomy in the title, certainly for what might make this show. So I want to start with, why leadership anatomy? Why is that the frame that you chose to use in the book and in the title?
Yeah, no, well, thank you, Kevin. I think it's because when I have looked at so many encounters of change, transformation, those who have succeeded, those who have failed, it always comes back to a individual, a person who is choosing to change, willing to engage, etc. And I found that there are some certain behaviors that are all capabilities we hold that we just need to deploy. So I'm kind of bringing the big world and change and ambiguity down to, actually, you have the anatomy to choose to succeed in change. So I'm sure we'll get into more about those, let's say, elements of anatomy, but it's fundamentally down to, as a human being, you have the ability within you.
So that leads me to two things. Number one is I think you've just given us the big idea of the book, that transformation and change is big, but it really is personal, and we have it in our ability to get there. Is that a fair way?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So the title is Leadership Anatomy, and this is the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, and yet you're hinting at something that to me is super important, and that is that change isn't really, at the end of the day, organizational, it's individual.
Yes.
And so while we're having this conversation, and you've written about this from the leadership perspective, with that leadership hat on, all of these ideas apply to us, whether we're the leader or not in a given change. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the thing is that as a leader, you are expected to lead the way. You are expected to be at the forefront of driving this change. And of course, the impact, if you do not do so, is much bigger. That does not mean that other people are off the hook, but your impact is significantly wider. And it's interesting because I've worked with top executives and high-end C-suite for most of my career. And when I then started writing this book, all my, let's say, social engagement and friends, some of them said, well, this is not for me. I'm not going to be able to understand it. But I will tell you, my mom, 75 years old, she's reading it now, and she keeps coming to me and saying, oh, this makes so much sense for me as well. She's a physiotherapist, has nothing to do with this world at all. But as you said, it is a human change and something that is relevant for all, but even more important if you actually are in a position where your circles spread wider.
So it leads me to a question, wasn't on my list, which by the way, everybody, are usually the best questions, the ones that just come to me in the moment. So I love this conversation. I've often said that there's no such thing as organizational change, there's just individual change. Yeah. But I've also had lots of leaders share this question with me, so I'm going to share it with you. And the question is, okay, I know I have this role as a leader to lead this change or to forward this change. I get that. I accept that. What about when I don't really buy the change myself? What's your advice to a leader when that's the situation? I mean, because almost all of us are leaders somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Like, even a CEO has a board of directors, right? So, like, what's your advice or counsel to a person who's might be feeling that as they're listening?
Yeah, I feel that anyone at any level has a responsibility to build a path towards something they believe in. That does not necessarily mean that if the information you have received does not resonate with you, it's black or white, you're in or out. But you look at that direction and you find out which are the parts that could be meaningful to you and that you could contribute to. I think what's really important is if this is, let's say, a very small overlap, you may have to have a conversation first with yourself and then with your boss and your peers, etc., that this is what you're going to contribute. But do the homework to say, how am I actually going to be able to contribute with this? I'm still surprised with how many people put in hours and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into something that when you step a step back, you go, but the owner wants this, the board wants this, and you're doing something completely different. Do you not realize that you're wasting your resources and actually hampering the change that this company is going through? So a lot of people are so busy responding to their immediate KPI or boss's question or whatever it may be, or stories in their own head, that they actually don't make that correlation and therefore waste efforts instead of saying first, how can I find my own motivation towards this change? And if you've done that work and you really cannot find it, then I invite you to bring your energy elsewhere.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of that statement that I think is really important. You said you used the phrase black or white. And I think that in my response to people that have that question, it's often that they like, it's not a toggle switch, right? And you write about that in the book, that it's not just a toggle switch. And so not almost any change has some downsides, right? The question is, does it have more upsides than downsides? And can we acknowledge the tension between those things And in fact, if we can, and when we can, we actually become more effective at leading the change because we're acknowledging that, and it helps us to get through the resistance of others as well.
And absolutely. And we're so used to this confirmation bias. We sit in teams that have the same context, the same narrative, and then you come up with all the things that could go wrong, and everyone reinforces that. Instead of saying what else could be true, and what if we looked at it a different way? What are some of these unknowns that could become knowns if we bring in the right information and build confidence in these new routes? And I think there's a lot of this that is, let's say, mind games in the personal sense, but strategizing on corporate level that actually can build a very, very strong path forward for more successful change.
So you're getting now at something that I was hoping we'd get to a little bit later, but we probably need to give people the context. So, because I'm going to come back, I put a pin in something there, but I want to let you say, okay, the leadership anatomy, you've got 4 parts of our anatomy, if you will, that you want us to talk about. So why don't you just give us those 4 things at a very high level, and then I want to dive into some stuff inside of that. Okay?
Of course. Well, I would say obviously, but not obviously. But the first one is about what you see. So envisioning ambitiously, like opening your eyes, seeing the potential, truly envisioning as the first one. The second one is breathing life into that one. So it's expanding with curiosity. And there are a lot of layers to how does one expand, and something that people, let's say, default not to doing when they are under pressure often. So expanding is the second one. The third one is then steering decisively. So it's really about prioritizing, communicating, and actually making those choices to make sure it doesn't just become a dream or morphing into nothing. And the last one, which is the probably most distinctive and important one, and where you can see who succeeds and who doesn't, is about embodying with presence. And you could see where the first one was really about the eyes. The second one is about your lungs, expanding and breathing into it. The third one is the limbs, the arms, and prioritizing and steering, moving. And the fourth one, the embodying, is the spine. It's not rigid, it's strong, it's tall, but it's still agile in its movement.
So you said something earlier, and I did want to give people context as they're listening for that, but something that you said a minute ago about being aware that we could end up, if we all have the same contextual framework, we all have the same perspective, that it can cause us challenges. Mm-hmm. You use a phrase in the book, which I think is really important, and it's the idea of collective intelligence. So can we talk about that for a minute? Like, number one, I mean, everyone knows those 2 words, and we could probably even surmise what they mean together, but talk about that. But then more importantly, like, what are some things we can do as a leader to help make that happen?
Yeah. No, I think I'm a strong believer in the potential of collective intelligence, but I don't think we use it very actively, because we go into conversations with our perceived notion, and then we want people to either reconfirm or say yes, no. We're not actually saying, okay, let's say there are 8 people in this room. They all have knowledge, brain power, capacity. And if you bring in an AI, then there's even more than, let's say, 9 people, because that has access to even more. And how do you truly leverage that intelligence that's there? And I think one of the things that's been interesting throughout my career is forcing yourself to be open in that discovery, forcing yourself to look at that complementary knowledge. I can say I was once at INSEAD, and the professor gave us a good task, and he said, so would you rather have a team that consists of 80% confident, capable people that are 80% confident, or would you have a team that's 20% competent and 60% confident? And logically, a lot of people went to the 80-80 because they seem to know most, right? But the problem is, when you are too confident, you don't ask those questions, and you don't remain curious about what are the blind spots that you may be having. Whereas the other team that knows they are not the best in the world, they will be curious, they will be asking questions, they will be exploring whether other people could better fit in. And I think this is such an interesting perspective, that we often go for the easy thing that ends up costing us, because we don't understand that there is a huge potential in the collective intelligence. I would also say, from an organizational perspective, as a leader, you are highly likely to carry a huge clout when you engage in a conversation, and people want to impress and look good in your presence. So how do you make sure that you are truly creating the context so that they understand which small piece of the puzzle could they be contributing with? Because it's also going to be painful if everyone says, here's my 100%, go look at it. But instead saying, here's the context, here's the piece of the puzzle I'm missing, who has a potential to add to that?
There's a real unintentional thing that leaders do here that gets in the way. And it's not always, I'm expressing positive intent here, assuming positive intent that it's unintentional. It is sometimes intentional, but regardless of intention, it's a problem. And that is if we as the leader, because as you said rightly, that we have clout, whether it's just with our team or we're the leader of the, like there's multiple levels, doesn't matter. The more levels, the more clout. But here's the point. Point is, if we try to set context so much that we frame the problem too much, then we will not get the expansive thinking that we want. Mm-hmm. And if we try to be helpful by sharing our perspective first, mm-hmm. we've tunnel visioned the group, most likely. Yeah. So you're nodding. So you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I will, of course, admit, and hopefully everyone does, that I've done this multiple times mistakenly as well. So you learn through that process. But what I think is also interesting, when you have been an executive, is companies like Diageo or Moet Hennessy or Maersk, big traditional conglomerates, and you move to a company like Google, you also see the difference between a traditional hierarchical leadership culture and one which is significantly more built on platform and collective intelligence by design. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I am saying that the enablement of access to information that some of these tech companies build invites for more contribution. What I believe could be learned from some of the more traditional companies is then the steering and the more strategic direction, so people become more purposeful in their contributions, because otherwise you will also have an organization where people have an opinion about everything, and it may be great, but some things are not appropriate for the job. So thank you for applying your open mind in this context.
Exactly, which means two things. Number one, we need to have the open mind as the leader, right? But we need to stay out of it and invite others to bring their open mind and make it okay for them to do that. Because if we don't, we're not going to get it. Yeah. They have perspective. They will choose not to share unless we make it safe and expected to do those things. And we have to do that by modeling. And that means we got to stay out.
And one of the most interesting things I found is I've worked across multiple industries, both within these businesses, but also supporting customers across multiple industries. And even at the highest level, where general executives are good at, let's say, keeping informed of what's going on in their environment, and it's who are the industry leaders and who are the followers, there is a missed opportunity of understanding the business models and revenue models of some of the adjacent businesses and the interdependencies. So when you come in and show, let's say, a banking or insurance company how a telco company operates, it's like it's a completely new language to them, when actually there are a lot of comparable learnings, but even more, there are dependencies that they should be aware of. So it's not just down, it's also across. And I think that's where this openness is even more important in today's day and age, where the transformation is dependent on industries moving, and also at a point in time where geopolitically people need to build in significantly more adaptability into how they run their businesses.
One of the things I really like in the visioning section, when you're talking about strategy, which you wouldn't have had to have read the book to guess that if we're talking about visioning, a strategy would come up. But one of the things I like about your conversation about strategy is the idea of framing. And it's connected to what we've been talking about. But say more about strategy and framing and what that means, and how we as leaders can take into context this idea of framing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who do strategies, unfortunately, they say, what's my budget? how can I increase a couple of percentages, and how do I, let's say, make minimal impact to my organization because people don't like change.
Which I wouldn't even call strategy, I'd call tactics, but nonetheless, that's exactly what people do.
I agree, but nonetheless, a lot of people do spend their time polishing up PowerPoint decks to do this.
Yep.
Instead of going and saying, what could be the future that we want to step into? And this is where I give a couple of examples, and I've seen teams get really excited when you challenge them to be a bit more creative. Imagine that you had unlimited resources. Imagine you were owned by these people. Imagine you had access to this data. Or if you deconstructed your company from the current silos and reconstructed it in different formats, how would you do? And then people go into panic, but we can't, and this team and this leader, it's like, no, at this part of the process, we are simply playing.
This is a thinking exercise. This isn't a doing exercise.
Exactly. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of great leaders do not give themselves the space to do this. And then they allow people from other industries, tech companies, or whatever it may be, to come in with a different perspective and actually eat part of their lunch.
One of the things that we have strong agreement on, you talk about the problem with busyness. I have long said that busy is the most dangerous 4-letter word in English language. You just hinted at it there, that leaders are too busy to think, when I think you and I would both agree that maybe the most important work of a leader, or certainly one of the most important parts of a leader's job, is to think. So why do you see busyness as being so dangerous?
I think it's an excuse. So people appear busy. They do activities to show their worth, instead of actually realizing what is the contribution I need to make and focus on that. I think in several layers of the organization, either if the vision's not clear, the priorities are not clear, etc., then you do this, especially in times of budget cuts and organizational change, just to show that you cannot be replaced and removed. But busyness is just as much a thing in people's mind, right? You can be busy by reading all the media headlines today, and you can jump on every single headline that's there. Or you can step back and say, if I look at the bigger currents, what are actually things that I need to react to? So I think it's very much a symptom of organizations, of behaviors, of times, and people are afraid to leave the office a little bit earlier because then they don't look busy, where instead they should be clearing their mind to say, I've now taken a step back, I now have perspective, and I understand which element is the most essential that I need to do, and I'm going to lead the way with that.
I think the really important piece here is that, beyond everything you just said, which I agree with 100%, is that where you started was busyness is an excuse, which I agree with 100%. And I think especially in times of change, times of transformation, that's one of the big resistors. We don't have time. We're too busy to make the change. They're not even focused on the outcome of the change, just the impact on their calendar in the short term. And so organizations that are stuck in the busyness or activity mentality versus an accomplishment mentality or mindset, that becomes the first problem in getting the transformation to move.
Yeah, I will say I'm meeting with an executive tomorrow, and I kind of hope he's not listening to this podcast, because I will not mention names, but put him a bit out there. So the brief is basically he's too busy and they're cutting teams, and he's frustrated. Where I'm like, well, those two basically just say that you haven't done your leadership job to me. So I'm just going to say to him, okay, let's not look at you've been cut 10, 20, 15%, whatever it may be. Let's start from what you need to do. And let's assume you only had half of the capacity. Let's start from that and then build up. And if you can add more, great, but you will know it's easier to say, if I only have 50%, what is most important to me in line with the strategy versus shaving. And it is scary how many companies still shave and shave and shave and shave instead of looking at what do we need to do, staff that up, look at the interdependencies and align behind that.
See, it's the idea behind zero-based budgeting, taking it from a different perspective, right? But like, let's start with a clean sheet of paper. And what do we really need? What are the things that must get done? What are the things we have to accomplish? Which is different than what are the activities that are happening, right? Which is all about what we're talking about. I want to.
People don't like the word zero-based budgeting, right? Because it sounds like I don't trust you. When in fact, it should be you have a huge opportunity to define the future.
100%. 100%. On page 103, I know you don't know what you wrote on page 103, so I'm going to read it. I'm going to read this call out in the book and have you comment on it before we start to move into to close our conversation. You say change does not happen in a single moment of clarity. It gains traction when people have the space to engage with it, internalize it, and make it their own. Comments? It's brilliant and it's profoundly true. But what do you want to say about it?
I think it goes back to where we started. If you do not agree with that strategy that's set, you need to find your own path towards it. But I think we also need to realize that everyone is on their own journey. Everyone wants something out of a job or activity that they do. And I've truly learned how very, very different those things can be, and respect how different they are, because sometimes it is indeed, I want to learn. Sometimes it is I want to be appreciated. Sometimes it is I want to prove that this is possible and I don't really care whether anyone can see it. So that giving people some of those questions to reflect on themselves so they can become clearer, I find very, very essential in driving change, because you may motivate them to take a step forward, but if they don't know why they're taking that step forward for themselves, they're going to try to move back. And if you do get that, then chances are they're going to take the next 5 themselves without you having to actually be an active role in it.
I agree 100%. So before we finish, Louisa, there's a couple of things, and I know you did your homework, so you already know what these questions are. She's well prepared, everybody. I am curious, when you're not helping executives think about and move through transitions and transformations, what do you do for fun?
Well, I would say I do give it away in the book as well. So I have 2 teenage sons, so they give me a lot of fun on all kinds of levels. But otherwise, I dance. Dance is my, let's say, it's my time to take all the thinking and ground it and be clear what, let's say, was something that needs to be part of my future step forward and what needs to just be an experience that moves past.
Longtime listeners will know this next question is coming, and because Louisa listened ahead, she knows this question is coming, but I haven't said in a long time why I asked this question. So before I ask it, I'm going to sort of give background for everybody. When I was young, I had someone who I valued, a mentor, if you will, say, Kevin, when you meet people that you respect or that you think you could learn something from, one of the things you should ask them is, what are they reading? So when I started this show, almost 530 episodes ago, I said, I'm going to ask that question of all of these wise, smart, learned people. And so, Louisa, what are you reading these days?
I'm going to give you a slightly long answer because, as you said, I literally just returned from vacation 2 days ago. So it's a lighter read section, what you bring on vacation and teenage boys who want to disturb at all the point of time. But on my vacation, I read 3 books. I read Fusion Strategy, which is I would say, adjacent topic to what I write about. I would say it's a lot more industrial and process oriented. So when I read it, I thought if people have read this, they should definitely read mine afterwards, because this gives you a bit of the infrastructure, and then you need to actually know how to mobilize people. Then I read a story by a Danish author. It's about a group of young people who are all-time friends, and they're at the stage in life where they're questioning relations and motivations and ambitions. And it's just a nice light read, but one of those that actually makes you think as well, like, who do I benefit from, and should I reframe some of my good social relationships that can contribute to more? And the last book I read was one I got from my dance partner called The Inner Game of Tennis. It is not a new book, also a light read, but it was a good one to read on vacation, and a good reminder of how you shape performance. So I will say, I have 2 other books in sight that I want to read next. I haven't decided which one's going to go first, but one is called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. It is written by a Wall Street trader turned professor, and it talks a lot about embodied presence and complements it with science and tries to understand how people actually drive change. And the other one, which probably should be read by everyone, is called Choke Point. It's about weaponization of the economy and global trade. So one of those 2 will be what I read.
And what was the title of the last one again?
Choke Point.
Choke Point.
Yeah.
We will have.
So I can't say whether they're good. I'm just saying they, for me, made the should read list.
They're on Louisa's should read list, and maybe they'll be on yours. Or at least now, everybody, they're on your list. That is, if you go to the show notes to find them, where you will also find, of course, Louisa's book, Leadership Anatomy in Motion. So, Louisa, as I hold the book up for those who are watching, where do you want to point people? Where can people connect with you, learn more, etc.?
Of course. Well, the book is available anywhere. So I will say there have been some distribution issues. So please, if it's slow, write to me. But on Amazon, on any bookstore that you can find anywhere around the world, it should be available. Otherwise, you can reach me on LinkedIn under Louisa Lorman, or on www.louisalorman.com, where I do keep content updated with all my podcasts and other stuff. And then I would say I'm loving that I am today continuously learning with more executives and helping them through their change, which fortunately also brings me around the world. So stay close, and maybe there will be an opportunity to meet face-to-face or on a stage somewhere. LouisaLorman.com. And so everybody, before we go, the question that I always ask you isn't going to change in 2020, hasn't changed in 2026. And that is, now what? What action will you take from what you heard today? There were plenty of practical things that we talked about that had foundational underpinnings that hopefully make them make sense to you, but none of it matters if you don't take some action. So it's my hope, our hope, that you take some action from this conversation. And the way to start that, to determine that, is by asking yourself the question, okay, now what? So, Louisa, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to spend some time with you today. Thanks again for being here. Thank you. My pleasure. Absolutely.
And so everybody, it's been my pleasure to have you here. And if this is your first time, let's not make it your last time. And if it isn't your first time, make sure you're subscribed. Either way, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes, because we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.